Hello everybody and welcome back to You Can't Win. This is Tom here and I'm joined by Don as usual. Today we're going to be talking about personal responsibility. This is something that has become something of like a trope that people on YouTube and on podcasts and stuff kind of discuss in different ways. Some people build their whole brand and their whole thing around it. There's people like Jordan Peterson that famously had the whole clean your room thing. People like Jocko who kind of takes this sort of like ex-military approach to it of like bringing the military discipline into your life and that kind of thing. So it's kind of interesting to me. I think there's actually a lot of positive and like beneficial stuff that is conveyed in these things. There's also a lot of backlash though, that some of the criticism is valid. I think some of it is a little bit less so. And it's just sort of interesting how it's kind of played out in this kind of political way where there's like a left-wing sensibility towards it and a right-wing sensibility towards it. And I think they both kind of miss the mark in terms of like what's a good approach for the typical person. So, we'll be discussing that a little bit. And then Don had some ideas about how that actually relates to policy and things like that. So I guess to start us off here, I will explain what I mean by the whole left-wing, right-wing thing. So you typically see this kind of messaging coming from people on the right? Like I mentioned, Jordan Peterson and like Jocko, I guess you could kind of put closer to the right-wing side of things. I don't really know what his whole deal is, to be honest, but let's assume that he's on the right in some sense. And the idea of personal responsibility kind of neatly fits in with some of the attitudes around things like welfare and like individualism and stuff like that gets promoted as like a right-wing thing where, you shouldn't depend on other people. You need to kind of take care of yourself. And that sort of plays out in this right-wing politics where it's like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's not my responsibility to take care of people who are poor or to, what I do for me is should be mine, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then of course, like the left wing the left tends to push back on this, right? Like they're, for precisely the reasons that the right wing kind of likes to use these ideas, the left criticizes them and kind of reacts to them as if they're like inherently right-wing, as if they're inherently like anti-working class or just anti, like they're pro-capitalist in some sort of fundamental way. And I think that's a little bit off base. Like I definitely agree with the criticism of the politicization of it on the right-wing side. Like I think that it's not a good thing to kind of use these ideas to advocate against like social programs and that kind of stuff or sure, like defending the ultra rich or whatever. But I think there's also something to be said for whether it's because we just live in a capitalist society and it's just kind of is what it is, and part of that means like adopting some measure of self-sufficiency and individual responsibility and all that kind of stuff, or if it's just like a universal thing that's just like a good quality to have, to be able to take care of yourself and to like understand like how to, if you need to get something done or if things aren't going well, how to take care of that, and all that kind of stuff. I think that there's something to be said for just that being a positive quality to develop for yourself, and it doesn't need to be this like politicized thing where your approach to it or your ideas about it are somehow reflective of your politics, and that's basically all that it's really about. I think that you can like uphold these kind of values and it doesn't need to become this political kind of thing. Or it can be a political thing, but it can be like in a more positive sort of way. Like it doesn't have to just slot into these, left or right camp sort of thing. It can just be something that exists in your politics in a positive way without necessarily being like this mudslinging back and forth kind of a thing.
Yeah, it could be something like looking at a way to flourish as an individual or something, or like to improve yourself in a way that lets you help others more or something like that too, or something. Doesn't have to be necessarily this, individualist way of looking at it too can also be kind of like, what is my participation in this bigger system? How can I develop myself as a person and things like that? Yeah, I get that. I should say that like most of my life, none of this really made sense to me in terms of personal responsibility and all that, because I had a very, very sociological kind of view of this kind of stuff where it's like, you can either do something or you can't. And if you're not doing it, it's because you can't, kind of thing like that. Those is a very, very simple way of looking at it. But you know, especially when it comes to stuff like, you know, if you're looking at the extremes of individual behavior as reasons why people shouldn't be able to access certain programs or some of that, like, you know, if they're like, well, we should drug test people on welfare because if, you know, they shouldn't be taking drugs if they're on welfare or something like that. That's the kind of policy debate that ended up sort of floating around in the news. So for me, I'm like, well, you know, no one would make that choice. So it's obviously not a choice or something like that kind of thing. But there is that like gray area where it's not that extreme. Like it's not that sociological. It's much more individual, where I do think that there is a lot of wiggle room for a lot of people. I think that for me personally, I find it hard to relate to in some ways because I always feel like I'm almost like swimming towards the surface or something, like really, really hard to get anything done on a day-to-day basis. Like I always feel very, very swamped with everything. And I feel like it's hard for me to negotiate with that. So the idea that like it's because I'm lazy just seems absurd to me, because it's like I'm trying really hard just to do anything kind of thing, right? So I always kind of assume that that's what everyone else must feel like if they're in that situation. And therefore, you know, I try to be sympathetic about that. But that's not necessarily the case, I think. I think that there is some wiggle room that you can kind of push for where you can make changes that improve your life or something. So, yeah.
Yeah, that actually brings up an interesting thing that maybe we'll discuss later on, which I think a lot of this, the reason it becomes this political issue is because it raises the question of to what extent is there like a collective obligation upon enculturing certain sorts of attitudes and values in people. And I think the left and right have very different ideas about that. Even, you know, they both say, yes, we should do this, but they have different ideas about what those values ought to be and how they ought to be, you know, how that should be implemented, stuff like that. But yeah, the drugs thing is a good example of this, I think, when we're talking about like social policies and stuff like that, because I think pretty much anyone would say that it's probably better for people to not be on drugs regardless of their situation, but especially if they're in a situation where they actually need like assistance of some kind, you know? Like, just like if all other things being equal, do you want them on drugs or not for their own good? You probably say no. You know, so there is something to be said for like, well, they're so miserable, they need some sort of escapism and that kind of thing. Or it's just like, you know, it's a form of recreation if they're doing it like in a way that isn't harming themselves or others or whatnot. Like, okay, you know, sure. But, you know, there's enough harm that happens from this, like biologically and psychologically and just like in their ability to just improve their life, you know, that is probably better if they're not, right?
Yeah.
But you don't need to approach it from the punitive side of things, right? Like, which is that drug testing thing. It's like, well, if you're making these choices, then you'll be punished by not being allowed to work at that place, you know? And, you know, sometimes it makes sense, right? Like if you're working around heavy machinery and all that kind of stuff, like I've been in situations like that where they did drug tests because they were legally obliged to, but they was a lot of like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You don't worry about it. Like you don't really have to, you know what I mean? Like they were very, left you a lot of wiggle room. So yeah, the drug testing thing, I don't have like an absolute kind of opinion about it. I think in general, like it's probably better if we get rid of that in most cases, except like where it's obviously like a kind of a necessary thing just for workplace safety and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think the more interesting stuff to discuss around that is just like what's like a healthy way to approach this, because I think the right tends to kind of approach it, like I said, from this like punitive angle. and the left kind of approaches it from this like, it's funny, it's almost like a libertarian sort of thing where it's like, if you're not harming anyone, just let people do what they're going to do. It's none of your business sort of a thing.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe it's not necessarily the place of the government or a workplace to make these decisions, but I think at some level we should kind of have like a collective decision that's made about how to push people towards the choice that's like better for them, in a way that isn't punitive, isn't condescending, and I think abandoning that just like outright is, I don't know if that's necessarily the right way to go,
Sure. Yeah, I think that it's a difficult question though in some ways, because in the sociological way of looking at things, a lot of the time it's just like, you end up having this view sometimes where it's like, okay, well, all of these things are basically determined by policy in some ways. Like that's the way that the standard sort of way of viewing it. Therefore, instead of worrying about individuals, like how they should behave in different ways, just, give them more money or provide childcare or do whatever we need in the material sense to get them where they'll naturally make the right choices or something like that. But I think it is much more complex than that. I think that, or at least that's like a basis for action. But then like how you confront the world as an individual is a much different question. You can't think of yourself in this sociological way where I think it's important to kind of run through that a bit, but you can't think of yourself as wholly determined by your situation, or else you're just paralyzed by it. Like that's just, there's no way to make progress then, because you can just immediately say, well, I have this or that problem, therefore I have no, it's not even like responsibility. It's no capability to get better or something. There's no capability there to actually fix a problem. So I think that's different than a responsibility in some sense, because it's like, it's the responsibility side has like a punitive edge to it in some ways. That's what people kind of associate with on the left, when it's not just the sort of like individual decision whether or not to do something, and then you're punished if you don't do it. It's also like a matter of the rewards you get from choosing actions that are better or something like that too, right? Like there's positive spin you can put on it. So yeah.
Right. And I think that's what's lacking, right? I think there's a lot of, for lack of a better term, is just like excuse seeking and stuff that you see on the kind of like leftish discourse. Like I hesitate to just call it left, because I don't know if it's just necessarily like people who are like avowed leftist, like it's not a political discourse. It's just kind of this, it's a cultural thing, and it's just kind of like the left culture sort of thing. Like, people will find all kinds of things to kind of find reasons why they don't have to do certain things for themselves, and why a lot of times it's people who have some kind of, either it's just a support system of some kind that they're, lucky enough to have, or it goes far beyond that, and they're just like straight up like just rich kids, just like privileged type people, and they just come up with all these excuses basically to justify why they're in the position they're in. It's because they're actually a victim of something, and they can't do anything else except like live this sort of lifestyle or whatever. And I don't even care. Like I don't care if there are people that live like that. Like I don't have like some people on the right get really worked up about this. Like when there's people like living like that just really eats them up inside for some reason. That doesn't bother me. But if these people were like my friends or something like that, I would want them to like just have a better life, because that seems kind of miserable in its own way. Even if you have like a really cushy existence, like it just seems kind of pathetic.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's one reason why I look at those, the statistics around it too. It's almost like it does end up almost becoming absurd to some extent, though, because it's like, if the option is between a very low level of, income and all that, and some sort of work and that somehow, or, better situation that provides a lot more, it's like, it's almost like the economic logic is somehow turned on itself kind of thing, like if it's obviously better that the work is supposed to solve a lot of those other problems and make you better off, then it's like, what is irrational about the situation that is not letting them choose the better option kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not really about judging people, it's not really about like figuring out who are the people who aren't fulfilling their 100% of their potential or whatever. It's more about like having, as a person, you just want to make for yourself, you want to make those decisions to be the best that they can be, in accordance with your goals and like what kind of a life you want to live, Sure. So, if we kind of go by the standard of like, making more money, having more stuff, having a nicer house, all that kind of stuff means you're doing better than without those things, then I'm not meeting my potential, I don't think,
Mm-hmm.
I'm living pretty like frugally and, but I don't work very hard for it. So I'm happy with that. Like, to me, that's like a good trade-off. It's not something that's probably sustainable, but that's I'm happy doing that for now until a better opportunity comes along.
Yeah.
But in some cases, it's people making decisions that are, it's not in accordance with those goals. It's just a negative choice. It's like just a bad choice, and it's there's a lot of reasons for this. Could be they're kind of misguided in some way, like they have things kind of twisted up in their mind about like why they're doing the things they're doing, and they can't really see how it's like negatively impacting them, or they're not thinking about it or whatever. They're just kind of going along with things. Like people talk about this with like student debt. There's stuff, people always used to say, I don't know if they still say this, but like, don't go to college, just go get some training and get a job and you'll make more money and you won't be in debt and all that kind of stuff. And I think that makes a lot of sense for a lot of people, to be honest. Like, I don't think that's bad advice or anything. But there's a lot of people that kind of just feel like they need to go to college anyways and take on that debt and all that kind of stuff. And that's not always a good choice or whatever. But it boils down to even just like little things too, like Jordan Peterson's clean your room kind of thing, right? Like eating right, getting exercise, leaving bad habits, starting good habits, all that kind of stuff. I think that's really what it kind of comes down to for me. Like, I think that if you simply go by the logic of like, I'm determined, like I'm a product of my environment, I don't, all my behavior is basically just the result of the things around me, and I have no actual will. Like, it's all predetermined already. Then you're definitely going to sell yourself short, so you kind of want to exercise your will in as much as you can in a way that makes sense for you, so you got to figure out your goals, and then you figure out what your behavior ought to be to meet those goals, and then put it into play, put into action, figure out how to do that.
Sure.
I guess.
Yeah.
So like, to me, that's like the real positive and kind of productive element that is at the core of all this kind of personal responsibility stuff that I actually appreciate.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that for a long time, so the way that I kind of, my trajectory on this kind of thing, where for many years I started to get like worse sort of mentally. And what ended up happening was I sort of, physically felt a lot of pain trying to do anything, just like, which was probably caused by, mental states and stuff, but that was sort of how it affected me. It still does, but like and what happened was, I had this sort of convinced thing that, okay, the way that I'll handle this is by throwing myself sort of, into all of the programs that they have, like go to the doctor all the time, go to the, employability sessions and all that kind of stuff, like just talk to people a lot and do that. And then, that kind of got me through a certain period, but then I had, and the idea was, okay, I'll sort of like fix myself through this process, and then I'll be able to do what I want to do. Like that's sort of the logic of the treatment plan. And then I got to a certain point about 5 or 6 years ago where I started talking to a different therapist and stuff. And I was making some progress and stuff, like, starting to kind of open up a bit. And she had said to me, it kind of finally sunk in. I'm sure other people had said this, but she said that, like, you can't wait to get better to do these things. You just have to do them and be in pain, basically, right? It's not like, it's not like a matter of working through it all and then being like, okay, well, now I don't have panic attacks all the time or whatever. I'll be okay with that. And and so that sort of process of being like, okay, well, personal responsibility in this situation isn't a matter of, orienting yourself to care and just doing whatever they say kind of thing, like just keep going to it, whatever. It's more a matter of, okay, well, what can I do myself now, assuming it's going to hurt, like assuming it's going to be a problem. And, and that's when I started taking courses at York and university, and got into, eventually I was like, okay, my goal is now get into a master's program. And I was able to do that and then finish that, even though that was like difficult. So anyways, that's how I sort of view it now. It's like, you don't have to orient yourself to this position of, okay, well, I fix myself and then I will be able to sort of meet these goals. It's more a matter of, okay, I'll, make step by step, even as I am suffering a problem or something. So, yeah.
Yeah. I you ever see like a 3-legged dog,
Yeah.
And it's almost like they don't care that they're missing the leg. Like they're just happy, like, just like any other dog. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I feel like that's the the mentality. Like,
yeah.
Okay, that's it. That's where we are. Like, what's next? There's
Sure.
this clip. I think I've shown this to you before, Don. It's a Jocko Willink clip. It's called "Good." You can find this on YouTube, and it's a really cheesy, like, little video clip that they've made out of it. It's really funny, but I actually really like the message in it, which is just like he's there. He's like an ex-military guy. He was deployed to Iraq and stuff, and now he does this, like, motivational speaker kind of BS stuff. But he's like telling these stories about, like, when something bad happens, that your sergeant or whatever comes up to you and says, we don't have the equipment for the mission tomorrow. And some people really get down on themselves and they're like, oh, all is lost. What are we going to do? I always tell them the same thing. Good. If you don't have the equipment, good. Weather's going to be real shitty tomorrow. Good. And he just kind of goes through this litany of all these different things. It's like, good. Because good means, means you're still alive. You're still there to fight. And, all that kind of, like, it's pretty goofy. But the idea of responding to these things with, like, all right, good. Something bad happened. Good. All right. Like, that kind of resonated with me. I've always kind of, like, felt that, not in those terms. Like, I never thought about it in that way. But the idea of, like, yeah, okay, well, obviously shit happens like that. There's no point in just, like, waiting around hoping for something to just kind of fix itself. Just like the dog, the 3-legged dog. It could just, like, sit there and mope and, maybe something miraculously will happen. It gets, like, a prosthetic. Someone fixes it up. Maybe. But why wait, right? Like, just make your best move. That's the kind of way I've always thought about it. It's like, you can only take your best option at any given point in time. It doesn't really matter how good or bad the situation is. You just take your best option. You weigh the options and you take the best one. And yeah, I know. I kind of think about things that way. It's like, sure, you can find excuses. You can come up with all kinds of reasons why you shouldn't do something, but why do that? Why not instead think about reasons to do, find your best option, find reasons for that instead of finding reasons not to do it. I think that's a much healthier kind of attitude. And that doesn't need to, like, bring in all this weird, like, punitive kind of right-wing stuff, and you definitely avoid the kind of like excuse making and stuff when you're thinking about things that way, I think. So
yeah. That same therapist showed me a clip from Mad TV in the office, and it was someone at like a OCD therapy session or whatever, right? And they're going like saying what problems they have, and then Bob Newhart is the guest, and he's like just kind and all that at the start, and then the second that they say what their symptoms are about, like repetitive behavior or whatever, he yells at them, "Stop!" And he just goes, and they're like, "What?" And they're like, he goes, "Stop doing it." And they're like, "What are you talking about?" And then he just and then she starts going, "Oh, and then I do this," and he's like, "Then stop doing it. Stop. I don't know, like just repetitive. And it's funny because it's like it's obviously like you adapt yourself sometimes to care in a way that like you're like, okay, well, I show up here and then they tell me to do this and then I do that and I do this, and instead it's like at some level the first thing you have to think of is, no, don't do that or something, like you have to kind of integrate that into your, at least as like the initial thing. Like it's not like that has sort of fallen away in terms of people are so, I don't know, like adapted to certain type of care. And actually, like Lacan, this was one thing that used to drive him crazy about psychoanalysis, because the way that you're supposed to do it is something like 1 hour a day, 5 times a week or something, and so he came up with something. I think he called it like the variable session or something, or the short session and stuff. And it would be like him opening up the door to his office and being like, "Okay, what's up this week?" And then the person like starts talking. He's like, "Okay, that's enough. Goodbye," or something. Like just and he got a lot of flack for that because it seems unprofessional and stuff.
Still charging the full hour and everything.
Yeah, and the reason why was because it's like, okay, well, if you're going to do this 5 days a week for an hour a day, it just becomes a process. Like you just end up showing up and doing it 5 hours, 5 hours a week for 8 years or something. And it really ends up being like a strength of wills or something, like eventually you just have to give up and go away. And then that's how you're cured. But like, it's very, I don't know. That's something I think about a lot, about that kind of, how people can get sort of stuck in the process because they think that's what's expected of them. So, yeah.
Yeah. There's a hadith that I think I've mentioned on the podcast before, but it goes like, trust in God, but tie up your camel. And I think that's kind of a good attitude to have about this stuff. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of things that are outside of your control. And with that, you just trust in God that he will make the right, he's going to do the right thing. It may not be the best thing for you, right? Like it may mean there's something bad around the corner, but it's out of your control. So, what's on you is what's within your realm of control. And, that's what you want to concern yourself with, and definitely don't find excuses to avoid those things or start like, you want to, you want to find reasons to do the right thing. You don't want to find reasons why everyone else is doing the wrong thing,
Sure. Yeah.
Because that almost is like this weird like mirror image of that kind of thing. It's like on one side you can make up all kinds of excuses for yourself, but on the other side you can come up with all these reasons why everyone else is wrong, and in a way that it like implicitly justifies what you're doing, which sort of is like making an excuse for it.
Yeah.
Because it's not really on its own merits. It's just on the basis that everyone else is wrong that you're doing this. And maybe that might be like a cross-political thing actually, but so like taking personal responsibility for yourself doesn't just mean like having guts to like just persevere and having discipline or anything like that. It also means like kind of thinking for yourself, like knowing what you want, how, and figuring out a plan to get there and then putting it into action and stuff, and not just finding some rut that's like a comfortable rut, you know?
Sure. Yeah, a lot of this stuff ended up like in political philosophy in the classes I took in it and stuff. It comes up a lot now, like this kind of debate, because like a lot of political philosophers are like in that sort of specialization are egalitarian in different ways. But there was like a lot of debates around what that actually means. And one of the sort of strains that was developed for a while was called like luck egalitarianism. And it's this idea that like inequality is acceptable when it's based on something that you can control. So it's like, if you might have a lower income because of racism or something like that, well, that's not acceptable because you can't you can't choose which race you are or whatever. So that's kind of like or like you shouldn't have to change what race you are, at least, like to get like the outcome that you want or something. But if it's like, if you had a society where people that work more earn more, then maybe that's some fair in some way or something. So and then so people had like debate around this kind of stuff, because it's like, okay, well, yeah, but can you like be unluckily born lazy or something, like can you be would anyone choose to be the qualities that give them less rewards or something, And so that's, I don't know, I think that's a kind of an interesting debate, because it's funny because a lot of the sort of prevailing right-wing ideas around stuff like taxes and all that kind of stuff, G.A. Cohen really writes really well around this kind of stuff, where it sort of ends up being like they lean on these liberal arguments to defend themselves, even though that the arguments aren't really, they're not really justified within the framework, but it just ends up being the popular way of defending it. Like, the idea that like, okay, well, if you lower taxes and it increases incomes for everyone, then that means it's a optimal solution for society or something, right? So people will defend a lot of right-wing policies based on the idea that like, okay, well, it makes them better off in some other way or something, So I don't know, that's interesting to me, because it's like, these compelling arguments, then you kind of think through them and you go, okay, well, how does that relate to, actual situations on the ground or something? And it's hard to sort of, suss out or whatever, because I don't know, I always, that does make sense to me at some level, like for luck egalitarianism, like for, if you wanted to build a social society or something, this was like a big, obviously debating point, where it's like, okay, well, we can't just give everything free to everyone, so we'll make it so that people have to work and then they get something in return, and you give them something based on what kind of work they contribute or whatever, right? But like, obviously, the whole like benefit, I think, of Marx's insight on this kind of stuff is that ultimately these things get a bit irrational pretty quickly. Like, it's not like, you have to kind of say, well, it's not that like objectively you should get something in return for work or something. It's more really that like, we're sort of clawing through the dark on this kind of stuff, and we have to figure out some way of making society work. And it's like, and so far in society, the way that we've had to do that is make it so that people have some sort of obligation to work for what they get, in some way or another. And yeah, that's, I don't know, it ends up being pretty difficult to kind of work through, because it's like, it ends up being these debates about what's fair, but it's not really about fairness at the end of the day, because it's like, it's just like, it's just fake numbers kind of thing, right, on a spreadsheet kind of thing most of the time. So
yeah, that's the thing. You can't. It's always premised on this idea that you have like objective measurements for all the possible variables and inputs into the system that you're trying to balance properly, but you don't. That's not how it works. We can't measure half of this stuff. You just make up some kind of number, and that doesn't really reflect the actual experience of those things or whatever. So yeah, I guess it's funny because that kind of works on both sides.
It does,
yeah. Whether you're doing the thing of like over determining relevance of your environment and stuff into your behavior, or you're downplaying that to the extent where it's all about your personal choices and attitudes and stuff like that. Like the right wing kind of ignores as much of that as possible in order to kind of point to like, oh, well, this guy deserved to die by the cops or whatever because he was a drug addict or something, or these people don't deserve any welfare or what, blah blah blah.
Yeah, and I mean, it becomes very difficult once you start to think in terms of optimizing for fairness and all that for things that are collective or that people disagree on. So it's like, okay, well, if we wanted an egalitarian society where everyone, their choices didn't really affect whether or not they got a nice life or whatever, right? And just, and you arranged it all through some sort of special socialist system, whatever, right? It's like, okay, well, what is the optimal level of production of society of like churches, or like of books about Islam or something, right? Like, it's like you have to have some sort of mechanism in place for people to sort of decide those things proportionally. But everything that's involved in those decisions somehow resolves back to personal choices in some way, right? Like it has to, and social choices. So it's like, you could say, well, people could just give, like in the, in the Soviet example, it was that, one of their big sort of things was, so priests will only survive on contributions from people kind of thing, like instead of being like a state system or whatever kind of thing. Like they'll only get donations to survive or something, right? But it's like, what does a donation mean in a system where, work is more assigned than it's not, it's not really a system set up to have charitable aspects to it, really. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, well, if all land is owned by the state, how much land you assign to churches or something. And the easy way, obviously, is to ignore this problem. But like, it is one of those things where very, very quickly it becomes a major issue for people that are believers or whatever, And that's just an example of an extreme thing, because it's like, the cost of not doing it is extreme to a lot of individuals because they consider it like sacred or whatever. But like, that's
right.
Yeah.
And then there's the flip side of people who have the exact opposite attitude about it and think it's a complete waste.
And it's not that it doesn't happen, like in our existing society, liberal kind of Western societies. It's not like those choices aren't made, both collectively and individually. But we do have mechanisms at the very least where they don't seem to work very well, but like people can, have, like a church can own a school, they can own land, they can own all these different various things and people kind of give proportionally. Now, it's not that that's more efficient in some way. It's just that because obviously, churches in the States, whatever, like have a lot of problems with how they're managed in different ways, right? Like they abuse scandals and all that kind of stuff. And that very directly affects assets and stuff, but in different ways, like how it's organized. But like, it's like, how do you, I don't know. To me, this is the kind of thing I start to think of when it's talking about personal responsibility and stuff, because it's like, how do you negotiate those different things if you're looking at from the perspective of overall, how to fix these basic problems in terms of people not having enough money to live and stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah. For me, I think that I just kind of tend to look at the problems in the premise, and I kind of think that if we didn't mystify things with this idea that we could just calculate it all perfectly and instead had some more transparent, like, value system that could be agreed to in a broad sense, then a lot of these things could be at least like narrowed down a little bit easier. So it's like if we had if we're talking about welfare and things like that, if we had a sense of like,
sure, as
a society, we believe that it's important that nobody goes hungry or no one goes without a home or a place to stay or whatever. And that we figure that out regardless of what that, we find a way to do that, right? Like
Yeah.
it doesn't, we don't need it to all work out in some sort of like, it boils down into like this, oh, the market, it actually makes sense because of like, you know, the people who don't have these things actually deserve it and all, you know, or it doesn't need to be like mathematically worked out a lot of the time, because it can't be, first of all, but you don't really need to do that necessarily. Like, I think a lot of times you can just have like some value that you hold, and you just kind of say like, this is something we want to accomplish, and then you just get it done in a way that makes sense within, you know, the people who have the resources to kind of figure that out, right? Like the government, and then like various private interests and stuff, you know?
Yeah, but I just don't know what the process to get to that point is. Like what sort of, you know, because, you know, people were pointing this out with the Amy Coney Barrett stuff, with the Catholic stuff. Like Liz Bernick had an article saying, well, there's like a death penalty case coming up, and Catholics are not supposed to, you know, be involved with the death penalty at all. It's just like a basic thing now, where Pope Francis said it's never acceptable or something, right? And so in the first case that she got, basically, that Amy Coney Barrett got, she I don't know if she actually voted or whatever, but she basically accepted the execution of someone. Like she didn't like say no or whatever, right? So it's like one of those things where even when you get the people in positions where you're, you know, if theoretically it's this idea that, now, I mean, you know, I am saying that most of the time, you know, it's easier to get people to agree on paper than to actually live through their values thing. And then how do you actually account for that then in building policy or whatever, you know, like, I don't know, or political movements at least, or like social movements around how do you change people think about each other and stuff. I don't know. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't really know either. It's interesting, the thing with her. I assume that she's a fairly cynical actor, just given by where she is. But let's say that she isn't, and that she actually, like, you know, she coheres to what the church says about this, like in her personal beliefs and stuff.
Yeah.
But her position isn't to relay that. Like, she's not like a, you know, her job isn't to convey her Catholic kind of views into the Supreme Court in that kind of direct way. You know what I mean? Her job is to interpret the law according to like the way that she's been taught that you do that, and in the methodology that she kind of like follows. You know what I mean? Like she has it's more of a technical thing. But I think from her perspective, you know, from this hypothetical.
But and that's interesting, because then it comes down to the question of personal responsibility in terms of how much participation in sin are you actually engaging in by, you know, taking on those sorts of roles within society. You know, I said this the other day, and then I found out that Dorothy Day said the same thing about JFK. They told her, that Dorothy Day, the Catholic activist, that later in her life, whatever, like they told her that JFK had been elected president as, like, you know, Catholic, and she said, you know, she said that it was difficult to imagine a Catholic wanting to be president. Like it was difficult to, you know, like that you would just run away or whatever. Like it's just I don't know. There's something to that. I think that has been lost or whatever, where you like not wanting to put yourself in a position where you would be affirming bad decisions, whatever. I don't know. So, yeah.
It's tricky though, because someone needs to do it, and it's better if a good person does it than a bad person.
Yeah. Although I think that sort of logic, I think it's true a lot of the time, which was what makes it tricky, but it's also like, I honestly think that everyone in power, and to some extent, I think that the number of people who are like directly just openly evil are very, very small. I think that most people are in a situation where they're like, we're the good ones in this bad organization or something, you know? Like, I think that that's a very common view, and that's how like most evil kind of happens. Like I always thought of it with like Colin Powell when I saw him giving the speech at like the UN about the weapons of mass destruction and all that, where afterwards he very much was like critical towards the war or whatever. He kind of pivoted a bit, and it was a sense in the public that like somehow he was the smart man that was sort of he thought of himself as basically a rebel within that had to kind of control Bush in some way or whatever, right? And I feel like that sort of mentality of another one that I always think of is like Gordon Brown when he wrote a book after the crisis in Britain when he got like defeated, whatever. And there was I read like a section of it where he says, or maybe it was some other book some other pamphlet or whatever, but like it was, he was talking about how he was being driven by a protest, and he saw someone's sign that said something like "Another world is possible," whatever, just one of those generic signs. I mean, the encounter probably never even happened, whatever, but like it just, he kind of said that, he said, "I wish that they knew that I was fighting for the same things as them," or something, and I see that all the time now after seeing those kind of first examples to me. I see it all the time now, like with Obama and stuff, about how now, and I guess in his new book, he says stuff about how he found it like this. He didn't like the CIA kill lists, whatever, that he spent all those hours poring over and proving all of them. He said that like he found it bad or whatever. I don't know. There's some comment about that, and it is one of those things where people just think that of themselves as trapped by their situation, doing the best they can. But it's their participation that pushes things forward. I don't know. So,
Yeah. Fucking weasels.
Yeah. So, I don't know. That's why that's part of, I know it is partly ideology, but I do think that's why I have that sort of, you can't win mentality on a lot of this stuff where it's like, the participation in a lot of the big institutions, they're going to get more out of you than you get out of them, kind of thing. Like, they'll turn you bad more than you'll be able to turn them good. And I don't know. That is a core sort of principle of mine. But I do understand how that is kind of, it can be used to avoid too. So, I mean, it is by definition avoiding, but like, it can set you up to be in a rut, even if you're trying in other ways or whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they should have resigned if they had such a problem with it. Just like, guess what, guys? This job is actually, you can't do this without being evil, and I'm just going to leave. I don't know.
I don't know. I agree with that. I don't know. I
yeah, no,
really should. I don't know.
Me too. That's why I'm saying it.
Yeah. Doug Stanhope has this thing where he says that, like, I can't remember the player, but like, there was like a football player in the NFL or something where he failed a drug test and for smoking weed or something, and instead of like being like, oh no, I gotta get clean and all that stuff, he was just basically like, no, I like smoking weed, so I'm quitting, and he just walked away. And then Stanhope said that he should be like sitting in the bleachers on opening day, just smoking a big joint, being like, and be like, I'm out of your business now, whatever. I'm not, and they're like, oh, flag on the play. I was like, that's your problem. Flag on the play is your problem, not my problem. I got the weed now, whatever kind of thing. I don't know. I like that kind of attitude, whatever, where it's like, okay, well, I just won't do that then.
That's a perfect example of like the kind of personal responsibility that I'm advocating for here. Figure out your plan, figure out your goals, put it, and like stay true to them, have confidence in it.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, hopefully that was interesting discussion, guys. Hopefully you got something out of that. I think it's about time we jump into the questions. What do you think, Don?
Sure.
All right, so I think we'll start off with this one. Any predictions for what specialized technical terms will be turned into new buzzwords for the winter 2020, spring 2021 catalog? I think people are going to become vaccine experts very shortly, and I think we'll be hearing a lot of stuff about that.
Yeah.
Cold. I was watching some news thing about it. What was the term he used? Something like the cold supply chain or something like that, because I guess that's like the big deal with the logistics is they have to be like negative 95 degrees Celsius or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my idea. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good one though. I think that the whole medical stuff in the last year has been great for that kind of stuff. Yeah, like where everyone is automatically just clued into every aspect of it. You know, it changes all the time. I don't know. But I think that we'll see a resurgence of a certain type of debate around whether or not deficits matter and stuff like that. I think that's going to be the big thing. People will be like, there's no reason why the government can't run a huge deficit. And then there'll be other people on the other side being like, actually, it's unsustainable, whatever. And stuff around like taxes and I don't know, the get fiscal kind of side of things. I think that will be a huge part of 2021 and 2022. So, yeah. And I think that that's going to be something to watch where it's like people will, I mean, I don't mean just like in terms of like the flippant responses. They'll actually like dig into like the numbers and stuff, but it'll all just be like junk numbers on either side. Just like people that are like, I've never taken a course in any of it or whatever, never read much about it. That just are like, actually, did you know that we could raise whatever? Like just I don't know. I think we're heating up for that. So yeah.
Deficit, definitely shit. That's what I say.
Damn.
We should have Mike on to talk about the vaccines whenever there's some information about that he can parse for us because he knows all about that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Let's see.
I want one like now though. I'm starting to get anxious about it. Not like anxious, but like antsy. I'm like, forget this. Give it to me now. I don't know, just as soon as possible.
They'll never get me. I refuse to be vaccinated. If they say like, well, if you don't get your vaccine, you'll just have to be locked up in here forever. This is just like, yeah, exactly. That's what I'm going for.
Yeah. I don't know. Toronto's going into lockdown again, like full lockdown. And other than schools, which I thought was a funny wrinkle in the plan. I don't know. But yeah, the teachers are like, yeah, this doesn't make sense. And they're like, well, people got to work.
Yeah. They recently put on like the tier 3 precautions or whatever in Chicago. They reinstated those, which is what they had back in May, I think.
Yeah.
Or April. And that means just places like museums and stuff are shut down. The schools have been shut down this whole time. They've been remote. But yeah, that's where we're at, I guess.
Yeah.
Hey, Tom and Don. Now that Oregon and DC are ending parts of the war on drugs, is the Biden administration going to use the DEA to crack down on Juuls? Meaning the vape pens, not our beloved friend, Jules D.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that is the kind of thing though that like I could see Biden, especially with like Bloomberg support and stuff, trying to weasel back into like public health measure kind of stuff that has like debating points to like make it look like they're doing stuff but aren't doing stuff kind of thing, like making it so that like taxes on cigarettes go up a lot or more and stuff, or like making it so there's like a federal tax on like certain types of sodas or something, like just maybe not like that, but like just something in that kind of sphere of like ways of being annoying to people to improve their health, like tax credit for home gym stuff or whatever. I don't know.
Your student debt is canceled unless you've eaten McDonald's in the past 12 months or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, if the DEA was used to crack down on jewels, that would be honestly that I think is in the realm of. I don't think it's going to happen. Like I think it's a very low possibility, but there is some logic to that in that like the tobacco companies don't like the whole vape stuff, and I could see them kind of pushing some sort of pseudoscience that it's like this is actually so dangerous, it's a big health risk, and then they come for your vape pens, and then all the QAnon like anti-masker people start getting in really big into like vaping. I think that would be a good addition to their aesthetic repertoire.
Yeah. I could see I could also see stuff like investing a lot in mental health or something and being like we got to invest in mental health, but like in a way that like it's like, you know, a few $1 billion compared to, you know, letting people that have cancer get like $10,000 bills or something, you know, like just like or whatever, like just, you know, I don't know. All of this kind of like health stuff is going to be micro targeted and stuff. So we'll see.
They should do all those payments as a single coin that everybody gets of whatever the unit of measurement or whatever the amount is going to be. Like you get that specific, a coin that's specifically that amount. Mm-hmm. It's like your cancer coin or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. All right, what is the preferred method for dealing with trolls? I make content that I've been promoting across Reddit to build up a following. There's one guy who comments on nearly every single thread I make in a particular subreddit. It is the most profound example of Reddit brain I have ever encountered. The only possible explanation I can think of is that he is actually 14 years old. Could be. For some reason, I feel a bit reticent about blocking him. Maybe I don't believe in capital punishment, and I think everyone should have the chance to redeem themselves. Should I? Is there some way that I can troll him back?
No, attention is oxygen for trolls. The truth is that you just gotta block and move on, or ignore them and move on. But you can't. The more that you engage them, it's like it's like one of those you know, supervillain kind of things where it's like, or like some sort of entity. Where it's like the more you fight them, the more strong they get, kind of thing. You just have to accept it as a cost, kind of thing, that they're out there doing that thing. Unless, I mean, you could distract them in some way. You could maybe direct them to some other thing or whatever, or I don't know, or pay them off. Just give them like $50 or something and tell them to go away. So.
I think that approach is what you need to do 90% of the time. If this is already a question, then there's not a way to like troll him back, because you're not going to be able to think on your feet enough to really do it effectively. I think if you come up with some sort of counter, like if you find some angle to this, just almost like instinctively or reflexively when you see him doing whatever he's doing, and you just have like, if you can find fun in it, then you can troll him back, because it's to me, it's all about like who's having more fun doing this stupid thing. Sure. And if they aren't having more fun than you, if you're both having fun, then that's great. But like if usually it's kind of like a zero-sum thing where it's like it's fun because the other person's upset.
Yeah.
So if you can find that there, then you're good to go and you just pursue that. But if you're kind of asking us this question, it kind of seems like that's not really going to happen. So yeah, I would advise the just kind of block it and move on kind of thing.
Now there's another wrinkle where it's like, okay, well, if it's just some random putts, then that's one thing. But if this guy's like a moderator or something, or like some sort of, you know, like if he has some sort of clout on Reddit, then it's like it might become, there's a chance it becomes a no advertising is bad advertising kind of thing, where you could just bother them and cause a scene, and then causing a scene would bring more people to your content creation or something. So, you know, polarizing the audience and then drawing them in, that can help.
Right. Yeah, that would be that would follow the kind of thing that I was talking about, of like making it more fun.
Yeah, but
if he's just saying shitty things or whatever, like I don't know, you shouldn't let it bother you too much.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, he's replying to your post. That's good. Like you don't really need to care what it says.
Yeah.
All right. How would you guys convert the OK Boomer girl to your respective religions? I don't really know much about her, so it's hard to get specific about that.
I think she's like Latina or something. I can't remember.
Okay. Yeah, there's no real super easy angle for that for Islam. Maybe she's probably already Catholic, right? Like
yeah, that's probably. Or like, more likely one of those strange Pentecostal religions, whatever, like where it's like, I don't know, she like has to fight a snake every time she goes to church or something. I don't know.
Yeah, does that little dance to the snake and like hypnotizes it?
Sure. Yeah. I don't know. I guess it would also depend if you would want to cynically convert them or sincerely convert them. Because cynically convert them, you could get them to do something like that classically Abby person, the Ben Shapiro's sister.
Sure.
Where it's like, she could be like, you got to read the Bible because it's cool or whatever, and then rake money off of that. If like the thought market was too crowded, then like that might make sense. But like, I don't know. She seems to be doing pretty well for herself otherwise. I don't know why she would do that. So I guess, and you don't want to like lead with shame or something. You don't want to like hector her into,
no, that doesn't work. So. I guess I could pretend to be from the tourism department of the UAE or something and get her to start doing like, like pro Dubai, like, oh, Dubai is so much fun. There's so much shopping there and all that, those kind of things. Mm-hmm. And then maybe she would visit and just be so taken with the beauty of that city, the skyscrapers in the middle of nowhere and the South Asian slaves living in the shipping containers and the caravans of like toilet waste and stuff.
Yeah.
And she would just, would just strike her heart and she would just immediately convert.
Sure.
It's happened before.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, let's see here. Oh boy. This says, as a woman, as a feminist and communist, oh geez, the thought of just wearing female clothing, makeup, stylizing hair, and overall appearance, transforming a man into a woman, in quotes, is absolutely disgusting and insulting, as is the possibility that there is some kind of, quote, female brain in a man's body that makes him effete and conforming to the bourgeois patriarchal views of what is to be a woman. Just a ridiculous way of reinforcing those patriarchal norms that enslave women for generations. You can be a fucking tranny if you want, just don't have the balls to call yourself a woman or proceed with the make-believe that the idealist bullshit called queer theory is some kind of great revolutionary or progressive movement. What do you guys think about this? All right, well, that's a very it seems very cookie cutter, like turfy kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which makes me think that this person doesn't truly believe this. But
yeah,
it also seems pretty impassioned and like could be sincere.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the level of detail and passion is actually symptomatic, though. It seems pretty like, once you got that much energy around it, there's something going on there. I don't know.
It's easy for me to say as a guy who doesn't care about any of this stuff, but like, seems like you might want to just calm down a bit. It's not really harming you, really. I don't know. Is it really hurting anyone for them to do this? You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to like. I don't buy into that kind of stuff, but I don't really care if other people are doing that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I guess it's not, doesn't affect me. So as far as like the actual arguments around that go, like I don't know. Like I can kind of see where this person is coming from, but it gets into territory where just as soon as like it's like a rocket launching and it enters the atmosphere where it's like in the agreement zone and then it really quickly exits. And then I'm like, okay, I don't know what this is about anymore. So, yeah. But that's fine. You do your thing. I got nothing against it. Calling people trannies, I guess that's like a no-no these days.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not a good idea.
Okay. When will Tom admit that he is on the Jew's pocket all the way? Well, you just outed me, but that's right. I'm here to kind of to validate the claims that there's anti-Semitism run rampant in the United States.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to add to that. I don't know. I don't know. It's funny because on the online, there's a lot of debates about this in the last week or two. A lot of people getting really, really passionate about left anti-Semitism and all that kind of stuff, and it got really like bizarre, a lot of it. And there's a lot of people that are just like obviously just like acting out kind of thing, like just directly like not acting in a healthy way. But then it's kind of like, I don't know, it ends up becoming this weird debate back and forth and stuff where it's just like, I don't know, so it's funny because I was like I was thinking to myself, I should only comment about this kind of stuff so often so that people don't think I'm some sort of terrible bigot or something. And because, anytime that there's like a prevailing debate, my instinct is to make fun of the debate as many times as I can, and then just kind of let it float away or whatever in my mind, kind of thing. I did that a few times. I was like, just telling jokes about it, and then it was funny because I just kept doing it, even though I knew that, like, ideally, from a career perspective or something, you don't want, I just opened up my new Jacobin and it has this guy in it. I'm gonna look him up, and or something, I'm gonna look him up, and it's me being like telling like 10 jokes about anti-Semitism or something like that. But like, I don't know. That's my compulsion, I guess, is to be annoying about these sorts of things. So yeah.
Yeah, I found it really annoying. I haven't really been looking at Twitter much, but I did the other day, and it was just like immediately you're reminded that like a good 30% of the people that have all these takes and stuff are Jewish, and then you give them an excuse to talk about Judaism, and that's all they're going to do for a week. Yeah, and it's like, oh my God, just shut up.
Yeah,
I can't take it.
But yeah, I don't know. It's funny. I get like sucked down rabbit holes on this kind of stuff because I read a lot of like I try to read some of the different like interfaith kind of debates, and there's always like bizarre takes that people have about like red lines and stuff around different religious debates and stuff where I don't know, it's been in the news a lot, that kind of stuff, where the line between self-conceptions of Judaism and what other people are allowed to think about Jewish people and stuff kind of thing, like it just becomes this very strange kind of thing where it's like, like there's a lot of right-wing Zionists that say stuff like, you have to believe in Israel to be Jewish, whatever, right? Like, I mean, like you have to be, they conflate the two, whatever, right?
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of
Zionism and Judaism.
Yeah. And then there's a lot of people that on the left generally who say that that's not true, whatever. But it's interesting how a lot of that debate ends up really being about self-conceptions, right?
Yeah,
like
which is what makes it so tiresome.
Yeah.
That's what is so annoying about it.
But it's funny because this is what ends up kind of happening with a lot of the debates around Christianity, and it's more Christianity. The theory behind it does influence Islam in some way, but the debate ends up being like around stuff like Messianic Jews and stuff, where it's like people that claim that they're Jewish and also are Christian or something, right? Or some other iteration of that kind of combination, whatever, of those kind of traits, whatever, where people that say, okay, I think of myself as Jewish, but I believe in Jesus or something like that kind of thing, right? Or, anyways, the debate ends up being that there's lots of people that will say that that's anti-Semitic because, you can't be Jewish and thing. But it's interesting because it's like, but it's anti-Semitic from the perspective of Judaism, right? But obviously, if the person sincerely believes that, if they sincerely believe that they are Jewish and Christian or whatever, it can't be, you know what I mean? Like there's some sort of ideological problem there where it necessarily can't be the case that everyone holds the same self-conception of Judaism as Jewish people. You know? Like any religion that is in competition with another religion, at some level there has to be some sort of agreement that there's an error from some sort of perspective or something. I find that fascinating as like an ideological thing, just the way that I think about this kind of stuff. But like, it's just true. It's just basically true that like, you know, from a Jewish perspective, you'd have to be like, okay, well, we're a certain people given the law that we have to follow. Other people don't have to follow it, but we do because we're in a special kind of position. There might be other religions, whatever, that are relevant for them, but we're the, you know, chosen people in that sense, whatever. That's interesting, but it's necessarily the case that other religions have to have a different conception of what that means for them, right? So I find that interesting. So yeah, because you see that constantly with stuff like Passover. So there's Christians, like usually Protestants in the States, that celebrate Passover. You know, they do all the rituals involved in that in the Jewish religion. And it always becomes like a bunch of viral threads denouncing this, saying that you shouldn't do it because it's anti-Semitic, basically, because you're basically borrowing from, it's like cultural appropriation, but it's supersessionism is what they call it, because it's like you're saying that the Jewish people don't even have to exist really because you're doing it yourself. So you're just kind of tokenizing them in a way, but you're also saying that like we have taken over their culture and therefore, you know, we don't have to negotiate with them. And that can be true, but it's only true if it's not true. You know what I mean? Like it's only true if the person doesn't believe that God really wants them to do it. You know? Like if the Protestant is doing the Passover thing because they think that God requires them to do it, then in their self-conception, it's true that they're being required to do it, right?
Right.
But from the Jewish perspective, they're saying that's wrong because we don't believe that. And it's like, yeah, but it's not about you in that case, right? It's
yeah, exactly. They're not following your religion. They're doing their thing.
Yeah. So that's a really interesting contradiction there, because I agree with their impulse. I agree with the impulse that like you shouldn't be doing that necessarily, but it's interesting how it becomes this viral thing in a way that you can't accept that just there's other religions that might have adopted certain like the practice or whatever, you know? So I don't know. I find that fascinating. So yeah.
Anyway, let's move on.
Sure.
Is Don the biggest celebrity living in Oshawa? Oshawa? Is that? What Oshawa? Is that? Yeah.
So that was where I was born.
Oh, okay.
It's about, you know, some distance west of me. I don't actually live in Oshawa anymore, but like, I was born at Oshawa General Hospital. It's basically like it was for a while Canada's Detroit, basically. Like it's the motor capital of Canada, basically. It was, at least, and yeah. So it's like a distant. It's not distant anymore, really, but it was like a distant suburb of Toronto, and it's pretty big. I don't know. I think it's like 100,000 people or more, 200,000 maybe. I don't know.
Any other notable people from there?
Shalom Harlow, the model.
I don't know.
yeah, I don't know. But yeah, so it was the big GM plant. And that was what they're rebuilding something there with the plant, but like for trucks. But it used to be just an enormous industrial center. So yeah.
Okay, so I just looked that person up. I guess she's probably more famous than you. So
yeah. So.
All right. Well, you got number 2.
Sure.
It's not bad.
It's also where they filmed part of a bunch of movies, but I think Happy Gilmore, maybe. I don't know. Something like that.
Oh, cool.
So that counts. That counts as being famous.
Yeah. So, okay. So you're number 3 after Shalom Harlow and Happy Gilmore.
Sure.
All right. Okay. Let's, you want to wrap up with this next one?
Sure.
Okay. So this will be our last one here. I'm glad you guys haven't done an episode where the funny host is sick or in LA, because as far as I'm concerned, you're both the funny host. So that's a nice thing to say. Thank you.
Yeah. Although, yeah, I mean, I do sometimes think when people listen after, maybe seeing us joke online or something, and they hear us talk about like interfaith and like personal responsibility and stuff, that they'd be like, wait, why aren't there more jokes or whatever? But like, I don't know. I think that it's better this way in the long haul kind of thing. So,
yeah, we do
chat back and forth instead of try to dial up the goof.
Right. We make jokes when it's like a normal conversation. I don't know. It's not. I think people get it.
Mm-hmm.
We make jokes when it makes sense to make a joke. We're not trying hard to do any particular thing.
Sure.
But anyways, that'll wrap up the episode. Thanks for listening, guys. And if you'd like a second episode every week, you can subscribe to the Patreon, and you'll get that as well as access to our Discord, where you can chat with us in our lovely community. And you can find if you'd like to send questions, you can find the link to our Curious Cat pinned to the podcast Twitter account, which is @YouCan'tWinPod. And that's where you can send questions that we will answer on the episodes. So hope you enjoyed this one, and we'll catch you again next week.
Thanks, guys.